Jacob, hora de dormir. Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Vayed.
4 months. This was the time the kings of Spain gave to the Jews to convert to Catholicism or go into exile. The Alhambra Decree marked yet another tragic episode in Jewish history. The homes that Jews had inhabited for centuries, the nation they had transformed into an empire, all of it they were forced to abandon, leaving behind nights of tears at the tombs of their ancestors. In the rush to leave, the Jewish community had to sell everything they owned, usually for a pittance.
¿Gran valor, decís? No parece más que una baratija vieja. Puedo ofreceros algunas monedas de cobre y estoy siendo generoso.
Pero, señor, estas joyas son todo lo que tenemos. Ayúdenos, por favor.
Ayudaros. Vosotros los judíos habéis tenido más de lo que merecíais. Llevad esto de aquí o aceptad lo que ofrezco.
That small amount of money was a fragile resource for a journey that promised to be full of dangers and obstacles with an uncertain destination. Rabbis, astronomers, cartographers, men of law, doctors, masters of trade, and a vast contingent of small workers were now experiencing the miseries of exile, all too familiar to their people.
Recordar siempre a nuestros sabios. Son nuestra luz y guía, incluso en los tiempos más oscuros.
Abuelo, algún día volveremos a nuestra casa.
Solo el Eterno lo sabe, mi nieto.
To the deep grief and loss of their possessions was now added the fatigue of forced pilgrimage. Many sought help from the Portuguese Jewish community for temporary shelter and relief from so much misery. Amidst that desolate and starving crowd, the imposing figure of the last Gaon of Castile, Rabbi Isaac Aboab, the greatest Jewish authority of the world at the time, who was accompanied by the mathematician and astronomer Abraham Zacuto. Rabbi Aboab, sick and almost blind, negotiated with the Portuguese king, Dom João II, for his settlement in the city of Porto, along with 30 prominent families.
Rabino, Majestade, reconheço a vossa sabedoria e os serviços prestados por vossa comunidade. Todavia, este reino não pode suportar tantos refugiados. Que propõe vós?
Que nos permitáis instalarnos en Porto, junto con 30 familias, a cambio este tributo en oro es la promesa de nuestra lealtad.
With an uncertain destination, were also legally permitted to enter the Portuguese kingdom. However, the Jewish influx into Portugal greatly exceeded expectations. Abraham Zaguto would later write that 120,000 of his co-religionists crossed the country's border.
Que podamos reconstruir nuestra vida en paz aquí.
It was not easy for that large community to integrate with their Portuguese peers, who, being half their number, feared an increase in anti-Jewish sentiment among the Catholic population.
Não preciso da mercadoria de judeu! Vós já tendes riquezas a mais, à custa de cristãos honestos!
The large number of followers of the law of Moses in Portuguese territory, now nearing 20% of the total population, worsened the traditional envy of the local people, who accused all Jews of the opulence enjoyed only by a small minority of their community. Discontented monks invaded neighborhoods, residences, and synagogues to deliver cruel sermons to the immigrants arriving from Spain and to the native-born Portuguese Jews.
Meu povo! Povo cristão! Escutai! Estes judeus são os assassinos de Cristo! São eles os inimigos da nossa fé! Não deveis negociar com eles, pois eles apenas trazem as maldições! Estes judeus!
To make matters worse, the plague that had been ravaging Portugal for years intensified, and soon the blame would fall on those who had just arrived.
O Senhor há de nos guiar para fora desta tormenta.
Oh, Senhor! Protegei vossos filhos desta terrível peste. Dai-nos força para suportar esta provação e curai os doentes entre nós.
Os judeus trouxeram esta doença desde Castela! Assassinos! Assassinos de Cristo! Hereges!
The enraged populace soon demanded the removal of the new immigrants, accusing them of being the cause of the deadly contagion. King Dom João II allowed most of the newly arrived Jews to stay in Portugal for 8 months. To make this hospitality profitable, he demanded payment of 8 cruzados per person, along with taxes on goods brought into the kingdom.
O decreto será cumprido, a bem da Santa Igreja e do Reino.
Hemos pagado todo. Tenemos 4 semanas para abandonar el reino.
Recebemos ordens para vos levar. Agora.
Tened piedad, tenemos niños pequeños.
A sad fate awaited those found in the kingdom illegally, without proof of payment, or who had stayed for more than 8 months. They became the king's property and were subject to slavery. Nobles and courtiers could choose Jews of any age at will, and those who were not chosen were sold to the highest bidder.
Servir-me-ás.
Entire Jewish families fled in agony to the mountains, forests, and remote hills. They preferred to starve rather than become slaves on the royal estates. Those who attempted to flee to Morocco generally faced violence from boatmen and captains who behaved like monsters without any pity. In Porto, the sadness of the Jewish community worsened with the death of Rabbi Isaac Aboab. The funeral of the great religious leader was conducted by Rabbi Abraham Zaputo. The stars were not favorable to the Jewish people, and it was sensed that another catastrophe was about to occur. In the summer of 1493, claiming that many Spanish Jews had not paid the required tribute or were staying illegally in Portugal, King Dom João II ordered the abduction of 2,000 children under the age of 8 to populate the distant island of São Tomé, located 7,500 kilometers from Lisbon.
Em nome de Hashem, abandonai este lugar. Que quereis vós daqui? Levem as crianças! Elas serão criadas na verdadeira fé.
For a mother and father, there is no greater pain than being violently stripped of their beloved children. The merciless king aimed to punish the Jewish community, while also turning the deserted island of São Tomé into a strategic stop for armadas and trade ships. It is said that a heartbroken mother, whose 5 children had been taken from her, threw herself in front of the king's carriage, begging to be allowed to keep at least the youngest.
Afastai-vos, mulher! Não podeis impedir a passagem do rei!
Majestad, os imploro, tened piedad. Me han arrebatado a mis 5 hijos. Permitidme al menos quedarme con el más pequeño, por favor. ¡No!
Estás como uma cadela ao qual foram arrancados os filhotes.
All those young boys and girls, dressed in slave-like burlap robes, were converted to Catholicism before being sent to São Tomé. They were the first standing baptism in Portugal's history.
Em nome de Pátria, e de Filho e de Espírito Santo. Em nome de Pátria, e de Filho e de Espírito Santo. Em nome de Pátria, e Filho e Espírito Santo. Em nome de Pátria, e Filho e Espírito Santo. Em nome de Pátria, e Filho e Espírito Santo.
The ships were already stocked in the port of Lisbon, waiting for the moment of departure. A perilous journey never before undertaken by other nations of experienced sailors. The frail and terrified young passengers, with their hearts shattered, were mercilessly dragged onto the ships, where they would travel for a month and a half under inhumane conditions until reaching their destination, if they survived. Unbearable suffering befell the hearts of the young ones who had lost their mothers, fathers, cousins, grandparents, and community in exchange for an endless ocean where water was the only path away from everything they loved. The tormented children were aboard alongside death row convicts who were given a chance at survival in São Tomé, and slaves whose mission was to ensure the children survived the rigors of the voyage and their new home.
E assim começa a viagem para o inferno.
Amid such a dark episode in the lives of Jews in Europe, and as if by divine punishment, the heartless Dom João II fell ill with a severe disease from which he never recovered.
Dios cui proprio nes miseri sempre parcerit suppliceus Erasmus pro anima famulito regis nostri quam andeloque saeclo migrari.
When the fleet of ships left Lisbon, it left behind thousands of Jewish people in the deepest agony. The expedition was commanded by a noble, Dom Álvaro de Caminha, who was accompanied by another experienced navigation captain, and also by a priest whose mission was to be the spiritual guide of the island and oversee the growth of the boys and girls in the Catholic faith.
Até ao presente, malograram todas as tentativas de povoar São Tomé. Muitos foram devorados por animais selvagens. E as febres não poupam ninguém.
Deus Nosso Senhor permitirá que resistamos.
The voyage was very hard for experienced Portuguese sailors, and even more so for the terrified children, endlessly longing for the warmth of their families. The terrible effects of the waves were also devastating. Nausea, stomach aches, constant vomiting, dehydration, and fainting. The children ate biscuits soaked in seawater, along with salted fish and meat. Too young to drink wine, they drank water stored in large barrels, which, infected with bacteria, caused infections and diarrhea. high stormy sea, combined with the northwestern wind, caused a huge storm. As always happened at the promontory of Africa, called Bojador. The days of pain and sacrifice passed endlessly. Only the toughest could endure the hardships of the journey, full of deprivations. There were symptoms of scurvy, such as fatigue, skin blotches, and bleeding gums. The sick couldn't walk and died in great suffering. The foul-smelling hold, polluted with human waste, was always flooded with water that never stopped seeping in and had to be constantly pumped out. Dom Álvaro de Caminha, the authority on board, didn't tolerate the slightest fault from crew members or passengers. Any mistake was punished with lashes. His concern was not the children, nor the slaves, nor the condemned, but ensuring the ship reached its destination. Disease, filth, physical punishments, scorching sun, and freezing nights. Many children died during the voyage, sleeping outdoors among lice, cockroaches, and rats. Throwing the dead into the sea was a daily routine for the crew. The hell for the unfortunate Spanish Jewish children did not end with their arrival on the island. In the Jewish world, it was called Iha Timsahim, the island of crocodiles. São Tomé was a massive shield volcano surrounded by a dense fog that produced thunder and lightning. It was an unfit place for colonization, covered with poisonous vapors and extreme heat. The coarse burlap that covered the children fell apart during the voyage, and they were now searching for branches and leaves to cover themselves. It was as if humanity was starting from zero, but the new Garden of Eden was full of venomous snakes. This inhuman place was destined to be the grave of all those children. It is said that when Don Juan II died, he had nightmares and deliriums about the children he had mercilessly sent to their deaths. children would never again hear the Shema Israel that their gentle mothers sang to them before they slept.